And it turns out they gave this young researcher, Ted Fosis, they gave him a crate of old urine samples from women that they didn't want to use anymore. And they're like, here, this is your project. Go figure out something interesting to do with it. So he looked in the urine and he found the estrogen, right? Because these are women. And what he found, though, when he was analyzing the urine, there was this weird spike that came out of the urine that he'd never seen before. In fact, nobody had actually seen it before. So in the lab, he cut the spike out. This is how you do it. You cut the spike out and you analyze what is a spike. That spike was a natural compound from soy called genistein. And so his lab basically said, so what? Because it didn't come from humans. Don't forget, this lab was studying human estrogen. And so he found this weird estrogen like spike out of women. They cut it out and they said, well, it didn't come from humans, didn't come from the women. Where'd it come from? Came from soy. So, and they're like, well, tell us that it's useful or don't tell us at all. All right. And so what he did is he actually studied the genistein, which is a phytoestrogen, a plant estrogen, which came from soy. All right. And this is one of the origins to how the whole urban legend about soy being damaging came from phytoestrogens. And he tested it in the systems used for drug development, ultimately, to see if you can starve cancer. And when he dropped the soy gene in there, boom, it knocked out all the blood vessels that, like, for example, a breast cancer in the lab would actually recruit. He was like, Eureka, wow, that's amazing. All right. And it came from soy. And that led to a PA research publication that changed everything, including for me, because it led us to understand that foods have natural substances that can cut off the blood supply to cancer. And that's led to my TED Talk and lots of other things that are going on right now. But the origin, the first food that was discovered was soy. Now, let me just tell you how this urban legend came about that soy is actually harmful for breast cancer. So, and it's like so many other things that are out there in the blogosphere, in the social media space, in the rumor mill. I think most urban legends on health come from well-intentioned people who are trying to put one on one together. And somebody heard that human breast cancer, some human breast cancers are estrogen sensitive, and they are. And then that same person also read somewhere that soybeans have something called a phytoestrogen and didn't think about the phyto part, just thought about the estrogen part. And again, well intentioned, saying, well, in that case, you don't want to put any estrogen from soy into the women. And that's where this took off, like this whole idea that women shouldn't eat soy. But unfortunately, they were wrong because they weren't scientists and they didn't know the data. So this is where, by the way, I think for anybody listening, having partial knowledge really requires you to keep looking for more information and not just take the halfway mark and say, I'm done, I'm the expert, yes. Because what happened is that if you actually, as a scientist, look at what a phytoestrogen looks like, let's say this is the chemical structure, and look what the human estrogen looks like, they don't look anything alike. If you had one on the left screen and the right screen, they're completely different. The chemistry looks completely different. And in fact, what was since discovered is that the phytoestrogen from soy blocks the human estrogen. It's Mother Nature's tamoxifen. All right. Yes, it actually blocks the growth of breast cancers, estrogen-sponsored breast cancer. So just completely the opposite, and it starves the cancer. So people would say to me when I was talking about this earlier in my career, they'd say, that's a nice theory, doctor, but look, I'm a woman. I'm not going to take the chance. All right, right. Well, so what I say is let's look at where the rubber meets the road in people. Let's look at real women with real clinical trials that had only women in it, right? Women with breast cancer. And one of the most famous ones that I talk about is it's a Shanghai women's breast cancer study where they studied 5,000 women who were at the highest risk for breast cancer. And you know why they were at the highest risk? Because they already had breast cancer. Right? They're at super high risk. And here's what they found. They found that the women who ate more soy had lower mortality. Wow. Okay.
About
Because it's protective. Because it's protective. About 30% lower. And those women who already had their breast cancer removed by surgery and well treated by chemo, radiation, or hormonal therapy that didn't have any cancer left, those women who ate the most soy over a period of years had a 30% reduction in the chance of breast cancer would come back. All right, crazy. So survival. Now, then the critic goes, and it's fine. I think anybody wanting to have an intelligent conversation, you got to be open minded. Ask questions. I always tell people, ask questions. They're like, okay, well, that's one study, even though there's 5,000 people in it. Has it been repeated? And what I say is that actually it's a great question because there are 14 other studies that have come out since. And in 14 clinical trials involving women only with breast cancer, in every single study looking at soy intake and breast cancer outcomes, eating soy led to less mortality. And in every study, eating soy led to greater survival. Tomatoes, let's throw out the myth about nightshades and lectins. All right, tree nuts, walnuts, pistachios, almonds, macadamia, pine nuts, they also lower the risk and they can also cut off the blessed life cancer. We're also talking about the Brassica vegetable family. Yes, so we're talking about not just broccoli, the regular broccoli. Broccoli, we're talking about even turnips, which are part of the Brassa family, all have sulforaphanes that cut off the blood supply, feeding cancer. Berries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. Strawberries have something called ellagic acid, cuts off the blood supply to tumors. This is all based on actually research I did right years ago with the National Cancer Institute, where we were studying things to cut off the blood supply for breast and other cancers with drugs. And when we threw a strawberry extract in there, boom, like we got a score. We hit a home run. Crazy. And so these are not replacements for your doctor, your oncologist, and not for drug therapy or women's health specialist, but these are things that you can do for yourself. That's part of healthcare. You go to the doctor for sick care. All right, that's how our system is set up. When you go home from the doctor's office, then it switches over to healthcare. We take care of ourselves. This is how the food within our own toolbox for ourselves. Green tea cuts off the blood supply to breast cancer. And by the way, matcha, which is the specific kind of green tea is good for you, and a lot of precipitation green tea. When you steep a cup of green tea, the polyphenols, the cacans that are naturally present in tea leaves float out because of the hot water into the brew. And then you're sipping the brew and you're actually getting the cacans, the polyphenols in your body. They cut off the blood supply of the cancer. All right, that's very, very clear. Now, but you don't get all the cacans out of the tea leaves because, well, you're just soaking. There's still some left. You know how in a sponge, if you just put a sponge in a bucket and fill up the bucket, even if you empty out all the water, the sponge is still going to have some stuff in it, some water in it. You got to squeeze it out, right? So nobody squeezes out all the catechins from their tea leaves when you brew a cup of tea. However, there is something different about matcha. Matcha is green tea, regular green tea, except about 28 days before they harvest it, they put a shade over it. And that actually causes more polyphenols to be produced. So, all by itself, there's more polyphenols, more catechins in matcha just by putting a little covering over it. Then, when they harvest it very carefully. Then they, unlike regular tea, which is just drying the tea leaves here and then selling it here, they dry the tea leaves, the whole leaf, and then they pulverize it into a fine powder. So now you get 100% of the polyphenols in the tea leaf in matcha, and you get the dietary fiber from the leaf itself. You get the polyphenols, you get the dietary fiber, you got everything. There's nothing left behind in a tea bag. Nothing left behind. It's all there, which is why a cup of matcha is really, really dense green. You can't see through it. All right. And in fact, you whisk it to mix it up and you sip it. And I can tell you, it's really amazing because you get a lot more polyphenol, a lot more cancer starving stuff out of matcha than you do a cup of green tea. The last thing about matcha, and this was based on research done by scientists in England, they found that matcha can actually kill breast cancer stem cells.
Oh, wow.
Now, what's a cancer stem cell? Listen, we're all made of stem cells. It's like when our dad's sperm met our mom's egg, we're a little ball of cells. Our stem cells are what allowed us to grow a face, ears, heart, lung, fingertips, toenails, right? So we were all formed out of stem cells. But when we were actually formed and born, all the other stem cells got stored away to repair and regenerate ourselves over the course of our lives when we need to. Now, but when cancers form, that mutation where you got the bad guy forming, if it turns into a tumor, that 1 centimeter tumor, a billion cancer cells, a 1 centimeter cancer, the smallest one you can feel, a billion cancer cells in it, is already fed by 100 million blood vessel cells. Let's stop those blood vessels from forming. Let's shore up the immune system. These are simple steps that can actually be taken by healthy people. And if you have cancer, now's the time to, hubba hubba and get with it, because this is not something your oncologist is going to be doing for you. This is something you're going to be doing for yourself. And then the researchers that I found, that you see what happens is that after you completely treat breast cancer, right? The women who are in remission, thank God I'm in remission, right? The 5 year mark. Unfortunately, about 20% of people who are in remission over 5 years comes back. Where the heck did that come from? How did that cancer come back? Well, it turns out that cancers also develop stem cells and they can renew themselves. Now, we know this occurs in breasts and other cancers. We don't have a medicine that can treat cancer stem cells. There's nothing. I mean, I can tell you as somebody who's, doing therapeutic development for cancer, we ain't got nothing for that. Guess what? Mother Nature already beat us to the punch, because matcha, of course she did, can actually kill breast cancer stem cells. Amazing, right? There's certain bacteria in the gut, and you can eat these bacteria, and the bacteria also found in food, but you can get it as a probiotic. And one of them is called Lactobacillus reuteri. Okay. That Lactobacillus reuteri in the gut text messages our brain. And what it does is it causes the brain to release oxytocin. Ooh. Now, oxytocin is a social hormone. It's the hormone that when the 1 minute old infant is given skin time and starts to suckle on the nipple, it releases oxytocin, releases the milk letdown. Oxytocin is also important for uterine contractions when you're delivering the baby. And also oxytocin is important for social connection. So when you're at the airport or at the train station or the bus station and you haven't seen a relative in a long time or a good friend, and they come through the arrivals area and you run up there and you give them a great hug and you're really just happy to see them, your brain is flooded with oxytocin. Oxytocin also comes out of your brain when you get a kiss. And I'm not talking about grandma's peck on the cheek. When you get a good, deep French kiss, oxytocin is that same feeling that when you're seeing your friend at the airport. And the other time that oxytocin floods out of your brain is during orgasm. All right, so this is actually an incredibly important social hormone that has in women a very, very important reproductive and also a connection between mom and baby. So this is an important hormone. Well, it turns out that lactobacillus reuteri texts your brain to be able to release it. So there's been studies that have been shown that in the lab, lactobacillus reuteri, when fed in the lab to animals just through their drinking water, like you ever had a hamster or gerbil and you got to put the water bottle up with the little metal nozzle and animal goes up there and starts licking it. If that's all you do is you put the lactose reuteri powder into the water, mix it all up, shake it all up and let them drink it, no biggie. If these animals were prone to develop breast cancer, guess what? It would reduce the size and reduce the incidence of development of breast cancer. Breast, wow, amazing. Wow, right? The gut being happy and having a new partner, the lactobacillus text message of the brain releases social hormones, which influence your mood. And it can really be quite profound. But here also lowering inflammation, also boosting immunity. The cops on a beat, wigging by, maybe that's how they were actually working. The other thing about Lactobacillus reuteri that's really interesting is that when you eat it in foods, Lactobacillus reuteri also in your mouth fights the bacteria that causes cavities. Old-fashioned yogurt that it's hard to find anymore used to have many more organisms when it was sort of made on a small scale. Small local farms are making the yogurt and supplying it. Once became a big factory, the probiotic qualities started to go down. But Lactopus rudi, it can be found in some yogurts. I don't know which ones, but I'm always on the hunt. So if anybody knows, you can look for it. Yeah, you definitely look for it. And please, DM me on social media, on Instagram or something, and let me know if you find one that has Lactopus rudari. That would be a winner. But you can also find Lactopus rudari in sourdough bread. Here's the thing. Lactobacillus rudari. Lactobacillus is named Lac. So Lactobacillus is a first name. Rudar is a last name. It's actually genus of species, but let's call it first name and last name. Everybody understand that? Lactobacillus is called that because it creates lactic acid. Lactic acid is what makes sourdough tangy. What we like about sourdough, and so people going back hundreds of years, like in France where they started sourdough bread, they actually would take a little pinch of starter material that had Lactobacillus rudi and use that into the yeast to make the dough for sourdough bread. And then before they baked it, they would pinch it off and save it for next. So there are hundreds of years of saved Lactobacillus ruderi that have been pinched off and saved over the years. So if you're going to try this, by the way, make sure that you're getting real sourdough bread and not sourdough bread made in a factory where they didn't want to waste time and they just put a little vinegar in there to make it seem like it tasted tangy. You want the real lactic acid from Lactobacillus. Now, that's only one place to get it. A lot of people might not realize that Bacillus ruderi is the starter bacteria not only for sourdough bread, but also for the real Italian Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. And by the way, I'm not talking about factory made, copy paste, something that's called Parmesan cheese, the stuff you shake out from a can. No. We're talking about the big blocks that you would see. Yes, in Italy, and you can find them in the US. You can order it that way, and it's expensive, okay? And so you don't need a lot of it, and you shouldn't have a lot of cheese anyway. I mean, cheese is a probiotic food, but it also has a lot of saturated fat and a lot of salt. So moderation can be good for you, but many people are surprised to find out that lactobacillus were also found in Parmesan Reggiano cheese. Yeah, the real Italian. That's amazing. Okay, that's amazing. So we and I did some research on Lactobacillus rye, and we found that in the lab, if you are studying wound healing, that animals that eat ruderi, they take that, it actually speeds up the healing of the wound as well. That's crazy. So in fact, it doubled the rate of wound healing. Hey, if you like that video, then you're going to love this one. Check it out.